So the first topic we had talked about was the sort of looking
More terrorist attacks, etc. Right?
at lives. It was interesting. I was in the coffee shop, in the Senate coffee shop, and one of the girls said to me, "How do you stop this kind of stuff?" I said, "You don't, right? This is really something that's very hard because if someone, it's either you monitor everything on the media and on the internet, which is impossible. The Islamists don't tend to come from the poorest
No.
of society. They tend to come from a middle class, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think looking at the human part, you have to look at okay, why was he dissatisfied? Because I mean, you and I can go on these websites. We can look at these websites. We
And
see,
laugh about it. Yeah.
and to some extent we might understand some of the arguments. To some extent we might dismiss others, but we don't become inspired by them, right? Because there's obviously something there that's resonating based on the societies in which they find themselves, and I think part of that is they don't feel like they fit in.
And that's what you're talking about is like how do you make people feel less marginalized?
Right.
That these people are right now radicalized because they're marginalized and somehow don't feel that they are contributing or they are significant enough in any way or form um, in their own country. The source, right? So the Middle East, where Islam is in majority, and what is happening there. It's very easy for people to say, "Oh, that's because of the authoritarian regimes, and because of that, there's some kind of disillusionment." I don't know. And I mean, part of the problem does lie there. There's no control of the Western governments, kind of. But what is the problem? I mean, you have been there, you lived there, and so what do you see?
But I don't think it's completely authoritarianism. In fact, I would say, in my mind, it is sort of the emergence. My belief is it's the emergence of this Sunni Shia Cold War. What I would say is a fight for control in this region, right? It's this Sunni Shia competition for who's going to control Iraq, Syria, these areas which are the most volatile.
You think
Lebanon.
so?
I do. The reason ISIS has become somewhat of a populist movement, very different from Al Qaeda, which was a top-down directed movement, is because the people in eastern Syria and western Iraq do not trust the governments in those countries, right? They don't trust the Assad government. They don't trust the Shia-dominated government in Baghdad. But when you look at polls in Iraq, they don't want anything to do really with the government in Baghdad, which is seen as advancing the interests of the Shia at the expense of everyone else. What is the root cause? I think it's the Sunni Shia conflict. How is that manifest in many senses? It might be manifest in the West as this theory of, hey, look, it's what Islamic State could represent. Whatever is happening in the Middle East and in what is the Islamic State, it's inspiring people, inspiring Muslims around the world, in small numbers, but in radicalized enough numbers to create havoc, right? And that is, I think that's the power number one of having the caliphate, the physical land, and two, that gives you the ability, to get your message out via the internet, via different types of media. That's really the crux of the problem, and I think, you're not going to see an end to this until that source of inspiration is taken away, that source of communication is taken away.
These people getting radicalized kind of project their aspirations, which rise out of the frustration, into the aspiration like, oh, let's go back to the great times when we as a community dominated the world, right? That's the whole caliphate principle.
I think what you're touching on is somewhat this feeling of an ummah, right? That they're creating globally, right? Which is, it doesn't matter whether I'm a Muslim, and the concept of ummah meaning community, right? In Islam, it doesn't matter whether I'm a Muslim in Jakarta, it doesn't matter whether I'm a Muslim in Istanbul, the United States, Europe, or in Syria and Iraq. I can be part of the ummah. I can be part of that community if I take the fight to the kafir, right?
Yeah.
So look, the whole point of this, the whole point of an Islamist movement is to overcome national barriers, right? When I was in Somalia, you see this with Shabab. Shabab recruits from every tribe, every group in Somalia. That doesn't happen even in the military. It's a hard thing to do in the Somali military to have clans unite. What is able to unite them? It is the common belief in Islam, right? So I think Islam and radical Islam at its heart is anti-nation state as we define a nation state. So it is not hard to say, okay, you may live in Pakistan, but you're part of the greater Ummah, if you will, this community, this Islamic community. And so Pakistan doesn't matter, Bangladesh doesn't matter, Morocco doesn't matter, Egypt doesn't matter. To some extent, you're not going to see Islamic State fighters coming and trying to target the United States or the Europe per se, but you are going to see people who are ideologically either aligned with them or inspired by them, who will carry out those attacks, who are already in Europe or already in the United States.
It's Islam. I mean, the Ummah is an Islamic concept.
And
that's what unites people all over the world, is that common Ummah.
I would agree, right? What I do want to do is segment out that the majority of the 1.6 billion Muslims in the world are not participating in violence, right? This is not their struggle or their jihad. And it comes back to something we've discussed before is at the core, how do you self-identify, right?
The first identity being Islam, is it because they're struggling or have no other identity, or the other identity is not really fulfilling anything for them?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I tend to say that the other identities don't mean anything to them. The whole marginalization in society, I think the U.S. does a better job of trying to bring people into a society that is more integrated than in Europe, right?
Is it? Okay, I actually agree with you. Assimilation and integration in the United States is much better. It's a better practice than Europe, for sure than Europe. Is it just to do with practice, or is it to do with the culture?
If you're sitting in Italy, what is an Italian?
Yeah, those.
It's very much ownership of the land, heritage, everything. Then you flip that around and and I just choose Italy. You could say this, or what's a German, French. But in the end, what's an American?
Exactly.
Right? And there is no tight definition of what an American is, the same there is for what is an Italian, what is a Greek, what is a German, right? And I think that, which is part of the culture, is part of that definition, that self-identification, right? I think feeds into how the assimilation works.
But you're indicating it's a new world versus old world issue. New world, there's no one who belongs to America or Australia or to not South Africa, Australia or New Zealand, right? So it's easier for people to integrate and assimilate, whereas Europe is old world. There already are natives in each of these countries, so it's much tougher. In India or in South Asia, it's easier for people if they want to assimilate or integrate, irrespective of the color, to assimilate and integrate than it is in Europe. It's almost like an American identity, irrespective of the ethnicity. As long as they accept and assimilate with the locality, with the region, in India, it's actually less of an issue. A Turk in Germany, a Balkan in Germany, or Swiss will remain a Balkan.
Completely agree. And I guess that's what I think on this one we are of one mind. My example would be an Albanian in Italy, right? Even though, on the face of it, if I were to look and see you walking on the street in Bari or Brindisi in southern Italy, I probably wouldn't know whether you were Albanian or whether you were southern Italian. But in the end, you will always be Albanian in Italy, right? It's not something that's where in many cases you can see a difference, as you're saying, in India, and it doesn't become an issue. In Europe, even if you can't see a difference, it becomes an issue in name your European country.
Yeah, but that's the thing in Europe is
Yeah.
I mean, the struggle of immigrants getting in might be to do. I mean, there's no second doubts that there are ghettos. Okay, so
Right.
I mean, we've talked about it. The struggles are also because the parents who come in say, "Oh, this is a Western society." Even though they want to embrace it, they want to impose the values of their home traditions which they left off 20 years ago on their kids. Okay, which kind of like marginalizes and this whole identity starts. Because of that, the second generation is caught between the hard rock, what's it called? The
Right.
hard
They
place.
have no sense of belonging either in the home country or in the adopted country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow they're providing a kind of resonance to people, these second generation immigrants who feel alienated, disenchanted, disenfranchised because their parents basically, uh, while they tried to assimilate and find this new country where they started living, they were very clear in one way trying to define the individual, the identity of themselves and their kids and the family to a version of Islam and of ethnicity that they wanted to. And so, because of that, they create kids who are so confused that they don't belong to the country, their adopted country, and suddenly they get motivated by IS because it has a lot of gusto in it, and they just took the fundamental part of it and they're deriving a kind of identity out
It
of
is.
that, saying this is what defines me.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. It's absolutely that identity. It's an identity crisis, right? For many of these second generation Muslims or Muslims that live in the West,